to History Nights in Springettsbury. This year, we're holding them on Wednesday, April 10th, Tuesday, July 9th, and Wednesday, October 2nd. So it's, first we started every second Wednesday, but then we got conflicts. So those are the dates this year. Essentially, we're holding them at 7 o'clock, and usually they run till 8:30. Tonight it'll be about 8:15. And thanks to the Springettsbury Township supervisors for their support of History Nights. I forgot to turn my mic on. Okay, is that better? Okay, sorry. A little housekeeping. Please silence your phones. And the restrooms are located through that door, back the hallway, and to your left. Other than when I ask a question of the gathering, I'd appreciate if you hold your questions and discussions until the end of my talk, unless I ask a question of the group. Now, as with all History Nights, this event is being recorded with the content viewable several weeks later as a YouTube video on the Springettsbury Township website. History Nights are a venue of the Springettsbury Township Historic Preservation Committee, of which I'm chairman. Our committee was established 32 years ago by the Board of Supervisors at the time of Springettsbury's centennial to identify historically significant structures and sites while generating interest in and documenting the township's history. Our committees consist of up to 9 members appointed by the Board of Supervisors. I'd ask members of the committee to stand and be recognized. So how many do we have here tonight? We have 3 here tonight out in the back. We currently have 1 opening and potentially another opening coming up. If anybody has interest in serving on this committee, please see any one of them or myself after the meeting. Our committee has started printing booklets on facets of Springettsbury's history. They will be available at History Night events. The first one documents the initial township building and police station, which was just recently torn down when this was built. And we're asking a $5 donation at the table at the back. We just had another member of the committee join us. Thank you. Now, I'll be presenting the program tonight. Now, the program tonight is Malin Haynes' legacy in Springettsbury. I'll share stories and details of the time he lived in our township. In the book published upon Springettsbury Township's centennial in 1991, Malin Haynes appears on more pages than any other individual. So he did have an impact. Now, for this talk, I'm using photos and sharing a number of details which are not in the book. A few days ago, I started to edit the talk for about an 80-minute length to stick to the time frame that I wanted to stick to. However, I quickly realized I had so much stuff that I decided at the last minute to break this down into 2 talks. So the presentation tonight will be the first part of the talk. We'll basically take you through about 1939, 1940. And next slide. The next talk will be termed Malin Haynes Acres. That will be presented at History Night in July 9th. That talk will serve as a complimentary talk to tonight's presentation. The July 9th talk will focus on over 1,900 acres that Malin Haynes owned in York County on about 12 farms and ranches. And essentially, I'll finish up Malin Haynes' activities in Haynes Acres at his farm there at the Yorkshire Ranch from about 1940 and onward, and look at the history of Haynes Acres, housing development. Finishing up with the Haynes Plains Farm. That was the name Malin Haynes gave to a farm that straddled Springettsbury and Helen Townships. It is on that farm on the Helen Township side of the farm that he built a shoe house. So that's when I'll get into the shoe house at the next talk. Now, the underlying background of the title slide is this 1952 aerial photo, where one looks at the Malin Haynes complex here. This is Malin Haynes' house. This is Malin Haynes' the second house. You basically came off of Haynes Road down here and went in there and circled around to the house. Back here is Haynes Acres. This is 2 years before the Haynes Acres development was started. So essentially, this is going to be the beginning of the next session in July. Now I'll get into a little bit of the history of Haynes itself. Now, acknowledging some of the sources, I used the York County History Center, Malin Haynes scrapbooks, which I'll explain a little bit later. Our committee archives, newspapers.com is a great resource. Photos and postcards submitted to me at various talks that I've given, or my blog site, York's Past. Now, I also have some personal connections to Malin Haynes. This 1959 photo, and it's from the York County History Center collection. It shows the 84th birthday party dinner for Malin Haynes in Phoenix, Arizona, where Mr. and Mrs. Zanner and Mr. and Mrs. Haynes were wintering early in 1959. Standing is Malin Haynes at 84 years old. His local scouting involvement goes back to 1917, and he progressed to hold local, regional, and national Boy Scout leadership positions. Haynes was also a major benefactor of both Boy and Girl Scouts. Ray Zaner, at the right, became the longtime Scout executive for the York-Adams Area Council after he organized the first Boy Scout troops in York in 1915. Raise your hand if you, your family, were involved in Scouting. Wow, almost everybody. Actually, in this area, the heavy involvement is mainly due to those two individuals. So it's a great kind of, but I'm showing this photo because the next photo, you see me in third grade in my Cub Scout uniform. But it actually has a connection because in the third grade, when our family moved to Springettsbury, many of my school friends and neighbors were in the Cub Scouts. So I joined Cub Scout Pack 62 soon afterwards. They met at Mount Zion UCC Church on Ridgewood Road. Early in 1959, our Cub Pack leader shared fascinating stories of Malin Haynes and his impact on local scouting, because it was announced that our Cub Troop pack would be going to Wizard Ranch for the every 4-year Haynes Safari. So in the 1960 Haynes Safari, I was there. He asked for volunteers from each Cub Scout again to gather and illustrate a birthday card he had started to illustrate. So my card was undoubtedly in that stack of cards given to Malin Haynes on his 84th birthday. I also have another thing where I was entertained by Haynes for 2 hours. In the spring of 1961, my dad purchased a small farm along Old Dutch Lane in York Township. After we fixed up the old farmhouse, our family vacationed there during the summers. I was between 13 and 16 years old with younger brothers and sisters at that time. Now, all summer, we spent a lot of time outdoors because the farmhouse had no phone and a small black and white TV that received 2 channels if the weather conditions were proper. So we entertained ourselves during those summers. Now, Dad's photo of the barnyard with the farmhouse in the background is from 1962. Dad was providing Malin Haynes air conditioning estimates for his Churchill Downs project. Dad was one of the founders of York Air Cooling and Heating along Whiteford Road in the township. And when he was doing that, he mentioned that he had this farm and he's looking for some animals to put in the pasture. And Haynes offered to sell some of the flock of sheep he used to keep the grass down in pastures near the schoolhouse. Dad's RD3 Farm Journal shows a June 24th, 1961 purchase from Malin Haynes for 11 sheep, which he paid $225. That fall, I was along with Dad as we stopped by the farm to feed the sheep when Malin Haynes' driver pulled up and Malin Haynes got out. For 2 hours, Malin Haynes stood at the fence, sharing stories with Dad that captivated me as he reminisced about a variety of subjects. That evening, I made a short list with a few major highlights, a few things of greatest interest to me, and a few things that Malin got animated about. This first-hand list contributed to a number of points in this talk, which I'll get to later in the presentation. Another resource about Malin Haynes is scrapbooks he donated to the Martin Memorial Library in 1960. They are now housed in the archives of the York County History Center. A book plate in the front of each volume contains Malin Haynes' own description of himself. Quote, "As a churchman, Boy Scout leader for 44 years, YMCA member for 56 years, merchant, sportsman, athlete, farmer, rancher, builder, financier, world traveler, he is a man who never drank liquor or even coffee, never smoked, and has been physically fit," end quote. So that's how he described himself. Now, I'm generally proceeding chronologically in this presentation with a few excursions outside the 40 years that Malin Haynes lived in our township. In 1912, a few weeks following the birth of second son, Malin Haynes II, J.A. Dempworth Architects is engaged to design a suburban residence in Springettsbury Township. The craftsman-style, barn-inspired house was completed in the spring of 1913 and still stands today on the northwest corner of North Rockburn Street and East Philadelphia Street in the old East York development. The Haynes family were living in a rented third-floor apartment at 334 West Market Street in York before moving into the shown house in 1913. At the time, the family included Malin Haynes, his wife June Brown, whom he married in 1909, their 3-year-old son Stanley, and their 1-year-old son Malin II. Now, as a brief background, Malin Haynes started in the shoe business during 1907. 6 years later, when Malin moves his family to Springettsbury Township, he is already a successful shoe merchant, billing himself as Haynes the Shoe Wizard. The photo shows his first out-of-state store in Frederick, Maryland, which opened in 1910. A window full of 98-cent shoes was a staple at his shoe stores. Haynes' flair for advertising and self-promotion had a big part in his rapid growth. In 1913, when he moved to the property in Springettsbury, he is operating 3 shoe stores in York, 1 each in Hanover, Gettysburg, Columbia, Carlisle, Shippensburg, and Pottstown, Pennsylvania, 1 in Frederick, Maryland, and 1 in Norfolk, Virginia. So after only 5 years of living at the Rockburn Street address, Malin Haynes opened 10 additional stores. So he's over 20 stores by 5 years after moving here. It appears that the photo shows June Haynes and her 3 children on the porch. I tried to enlarge it, but the resolution is not there. The youngest is daughter June Irvin Haynes, who was born in 1916. Sadly, the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic claimed her life on October 18, 1918, at only 2 years old. So Haynes only had those 2 sons survive. Now, on January 17, 1913, Malin Haynes and Edward Schausberger left on a trip to the Isle of Pines, and I'll explain where that is. Haynes was visiting his mother there, who had recently remarried, and Schausberger, a neighboring Springettsbury farm owner, was going there to explore investment opportunities on the Isle of Pines. At that time, Schausberger was probably the richest guy in Springettsbury Township. So Malin Haynes' mother, Elizabeth Haynes, was responsible for establishing a department store in Washington, D.C. in 1892. It was credited as the largest American department store owned and operated by a woman. Yet Malin told stories of the frugal nature of his mother toward him. Malin's first business in York was a small department store he started at 131 West Market Street in 1905. However, when the venue was failing, his mother would not help him avert bankruptcy, which he went into with that store. When Malin married in 1909, he was expecting his wealthy mother to give him at least $10,000 or so as a wedding gift. Her gift to them was $100. So, now the answer to the question, where is the Isle of Pines? It's off the coast of Cuba. Now, Malin Haynes did not inherit many of his mother's wealth. And the reason for that is largely due to Malin Haynes' connection to the Isle of Pines in Cuba. After the Spanish-American War, this island, about the size of York County and 50 miles off the southern coast of Cuba, became an American territory. There was a push to get Americans to move to the island. Various towns were established, often named for places in the United States, or in the case of the Soane 1906 pamphlet, named for the slain President McKinley. Elizabeth Haynes, a widow since Malin Haynes was 2 months old, married William Pack in 1911, after which they pooled their resources to purchase an estate including a very large orange and grapefruit plantation on the Isle of Pines. The York Dispatch of November 10, 1928, reported on the death of Elizabeth. Quote, Mrs. Elizabeth Ann Haynes Pack, mother of Malin N. Haynes of this city, died yesterday afternoon on the Isle of Pines, Cuba, where she resided for many years. She was buried today on the island as the law requires, end quote. Now, the United States returned the Isle of Pines to Cuba in 1924. Initially, Americans could continue to live there and operate businesses as usual, except Cuban laws began to be enacted to cause Americans to leave. One such law stated anybody passing away on the isle had to be buried there. Elizabeth's surviving husband, William F. Pack, sold the orange and grapefruit plantation, only getting pennies on the dollar. So that's where Elizabeth's wealth went to. After which he moved to Miami, where he died in 1944. Now, from 1915 to 1925, Malin Haynes utilizes J.A. Dentworth Architects, which is one of the more famous architects in York, to design 4 additional buildings for himself. The first of those was the Haynes Shoe Store, and that was located on 231 North George Street in York. It was considered the headquarters buildings of his shoe company. Now, except for the Haynes Shoe Store on the first floor, much of the additional space served as warehouse space for the bulk food purchases for the shoes that he purchased. He was purchasing all over. Boston was actually a favorite place where he got his shoes from. He had good suppliers up there. And he actually, whenever he was in the news for something that he did that was flamboyant, it made the Boston newspapers. But it is reputed that the headquarters office consisted of little more than a small room where Malin Haynes used shoe boxes to file records for each shoe company and shoe supplier. So he had a shoebox for each shoe store and a shoebox for each shoe supplier. That was his headquarters. The three-store building was torn down in the 1960s to create several off-street parking spaces. Now, this is Mr. and Mrs. Malin Haynes in 1916. At the time, June Haynes is 31 years old and Malin Haynes is 41 years old. It was taken during a gathering at the Schosberger Dempworth Farm in Springettsbury Township, and will be used to point out two of the people that seem to have a significant influence on Malin Haynes. Now, beginning in 1912, during the design of his Rockburn Street home, Malin Haynes worked with Reinhard Dempworth, a partner with his older brother, John A. Dempworth, in J. A. Dempworth Architects. Reinhard is married to Nellie, the eldest daughter of Edward Schosberger. Via this connection, it's likely how Malin ended up traveling with Edward to the Isle of Pines in 1913. And no, Edward did not purchase any land down there. He was wise in not doing so. This is the overall group photo at the Schosberger Dempworth Farm in 1916. June and Malin Haynes are in the upper right. Beverly Dempworth shared this photo with the Springettsbury Township Historic Preservation Committee, in which Reinhard Dempworth had long ago identified all individuals on the photo. So if you have an old photo and you know who the people are, write down in the back who they are. Because at the History Center that I volunteer at, we have loads of pictures that we have no idea who they are. So write down something on the back. Now, this is a close-up of the left side of the photo. Seated at the extreme left is Edward Schosberger, and at his shoulder is his grandson, 10-year-old John Armour Dempworth. Immediate behind Edward is his daughter, Nellie, married to Reinhard Dempworth. And essentially what Edward Schosberger was planning, putting most of his farms in the names of his two daughters, which is Nellie Dempworth and Nellie's sister, Annie, which is on the other side. So that's why they were called Schosberger Dempworth Farms. The two sisters owned it. This is a neat photo of the farm buildings on the farm. And the farm was on a location west of Memory Lane. You see Memory Lane up there on the top. Memory Lane, here's the railroad. I have to get out there and do that. You can close that. If you can find it. Okay. But Memory Lane is up here, and this is where the railroad crosses. Edgecombe Steel is over here now, and over in, maybe I shouldn't start. I'll stop using it. Okay, but in the upper left is maybe move the arrow to the side so it's off the screen. Okay, yeah, I think that'll stop it. But essentially, the farm field in the upper left is where the Caterpillar Distribution Center is now located. But like I said, Schosberger Dempworth Farm here, they sold to those entities. They also had the farm where the Queensgate Shopping Center and the surrounding apartments were built. So they made out like bandits for those two locations on a small. So basically, Schosberger was, I think, instilled in Malin Haynes his interest in buying land. So the next one.
I think we might have a glitch with that menu coming up on the bottom. I don't know how to get rid of that. But it's not letting me go to the next slide. Oh, there we go. There we go.
Okay. Got it? Okay. But 1 month after that gathering at the Schosberger Dempworth Farm, Malin Haynes makes his first land purchase. And essentially the land purchased is Wizard Ranch. He basically, like I said, the York Daily, June 17th, 1916, quoting from that, a farm of 123 acres situated along the Susquehanna River near Accomack has been purchased by Malin Haynes, shoe dealer of this city. On this farm, he intends to raise Hereford cattle on a large scale, as he says, establish a hoof-to-hoof plan of selling shoes. He says he will raise his own cattle, tan his own leather, make his own shoes, and sell his product in exchange at 25 shoe stores. The farm was bought from Charles N. Sprinkle and was known and will be known as Wizard's Ranch, end quote. So I'm showing this close-up of an advertising fan to promote the Cattle Hoofs to Shoe Wearer Hoofs program. Haynes actually did purchase a very large herd of cattle that year, but he soon drops the plan because he soon realizes the significant infrastructure that would have to be required to do all this, because he's basically getting the cattle raised for the leather, but then he has to take care of all the meat and process the meat, and it's like tanning everything, and so he said, forget about this. So if you have a fan like this, you can probably date it to 1916, 1917, because he started the program in 1916 and he decided to get rid of it in 1917. However, then Haynes decides he's going to open up part of Wizard Ranch for use by the Boy Scouts and a picnic grounds for use by York civic organizations. Over the years, Haynes continually added to Wizard Ranch acreage by purchasing neighboring parcels. By 1949, the ranch contained 320 acres. Now, after mentioning Haynes' impact on Boy Scouting during a Yorkshire history walk that I did, a woman pointed out that Haynes made a donation to the Girl Scouts in order for the housing development on his Haynes Acres farm to be named Haynes Acres. So the Haynes Acres development was done because Haynes wanted his name on it, and the buyer, Epstein, agreed to do it if you give a donation to this Girl Scout organization. She also challenged me, also noted that she knows that there were substantial donations in the 1930s that Mahlon Haynes made to the Girl Scouts in addition to Boy Scouts. And I checked both those out, and they turned out to be true. She challenged me to find the earliest donation Mahlon Haynes made to the Girl Scouts. Now, as an answer, I found an article in the York Dispatch of July 10th, 1917. Quote, Troop number 2, Girl Scouts of America, at its weekly meeting last evening in the chapel of the First Presbyterian Church, made final arrangements for a scout camp. Scout Commissioner Ray Zanner was present and gave the girls an interesting talk on camp life. About 25 members will leave next Saturday for the permanent campgrounds donated by Mahlon Haynes near Accomack for a week's outing, end quote. Now, shown is a Library of Congress photo of a group activity at a Girl Scout camp during the same year, 1917. So that's the uniforms they were wearing in 1917. Also in 1917, during December, Mahlon Haynes purchases his second farm in York County. It is a Springettsbury Township farm from the estate of John Lefevre and contains 199 acres adjoining the east side of present-day Haynes Road. Haynes names this farm Haynes Acres. In 1922, a triangular-shaped adjoining land purchase increased the size of the farm to 218 acres. Now, this illustration compares where the Haynes Acres farm was located compared to present roads. In the July presentation, I'll explore the 11 phases of Haynes Acres development in more detail. Got this. I wanted to see if people could see if those are Mahlon Haynes shoes on those boys. Now, during the summer of 1919, the Haynes family vacations at Niagara Falls. Here's Haynes' boys, Stanley at age 9 and Mahlon II at age 7. They pose for a photo. Extensive vacations became commonplace for the Haynes family during the 1920s as they explore America and beyond. These are these are kicked off in 1920 with a 6-week Southern vacation, which included 2 weeks with Malin's mother, Elizabeth Ann Haynes Pack, on the Isle of Pines. 1920 also has the beginning of Haynes' Christmas giveaway for free shoes to needy children. He basically did that through the Red Cross. Now, the Red Cross basically gave these out to policemen, they gave these out to clergy. Anybody you think needs shoes, simply fill this out and have them come to a shoe store and get free shoes. So that's his first kind of kickoff program, and he ran that every year that he had the shoe stores. 1921, the shoe retailer publication gives national exposure to Malin Haynes' novel way to sell shoes. The article notes an advanced agent travels ahead of this specially constructed vehicle to rural crossroads or a location within earshot of customer. He proclaims, "The shoe guy is coming, the shoe guy is coming, the shoe wizard's coming." So he gathers a crowd, so the crowd is already there by the time the shoe van pulls up. And then he helps sell shoes, and when the crowd starts to kind of peter away, the advanced guy walks on off to the next place that he thinks is a good location, and he starts to spiel again. So by the time the glass, he actually had a description, it was a glass enclosed, bright red vehicle with yellow lettering, and essentially they had a fitting room in it. Went in the back as an aisle between the two sets of windows that you get fitted for shoes inside if you needed that. Also in 1921, Malin Haynes again used J.A. Dempwolf Architects in designing a 4-story Haynes building, which still stands at the northeast corner of East Market Street and North Duke Street in York, catty corner from the Yorktown Hotel. He actually did it 4 years before the Yorktown was built. The building opened for occupancy in 1923. It housed 7 businesses on the first floor with offices and apartments on the upper floors. The first floor corner location housed a Haynes shoe store at 101 East Market Street. Haynes often donated space in that store for various civic fundraising concerns. Haynes sold the building in 1954, and recently Royal Square renovated the building with 10 new apartments on the upper floor. In 1922, Malin Haynes got into politics. He ran for a congressional seat representing York and Adams counties. Here's Haynes in front of his Rockburn Street home with his 2 boys, ready to hit the campaign trail. When not campaigning at rallies and banquets, Haynes spent a lot of time covering the back rows, greeting people one-on-one or in small groups. It is said that he drummed up all support for his shoe stores also. Now, Haynes kept his ads simple as he did with shoe store ads. The ad simply said, "This is the man," with a picture of Malin for Congress. "He made good in business. He will make good as your congressman." Now, during a break from campaigning in 1922, Malin Haynes attended a National Boy Scout Council meeting in Mountain Lake, New York. One of the other council members was Teddy Roosevelt Jr., eldest son of the former president. So he was hobnobbing with politicians. He probably got pointers on his campaign during that. Another place where one of the bigger events in Springettsbury Township, a Haynes campaign event was held in Springettsbury Township in coordination with the Kiwanis Club banquet given for 39 Civil War veterans at the York Motor Club building at the corner of North Vernon and East Market Streets. And Haynes is at the extreme lower left. I have a little yellow arrow there pointing to him. But that building, again, still stands. It was initially owned by a West Virginia coal baron, built it, and then it became home of the York Motor Club, and then it was a private building. Basically, a doctor had it, and now I think it's law offices. So it's a neat building inside if you ever go in there. Now, this is a poster for an Adams County campaign event. Malin Haynes was associated with several combined campaign events with Gifford Pinchot, who was making his first run for governor of Pennsylvania. The Gazette and Daily commented on talks Haynes gave at rallies with Pinchot. Quote, "He causes quite a bit of merriment in the course of his address by his many witty statements." Some of the early, I guess one of the early ones that Haynes was there with Davis, who was running for lieutenant governor. Davis usually, at the first two events, I see Davis introducing Pinchot. After the first two, Malin Haynes always had the honor of introducing Pinchot. So evidently he was able to liven up the crowd a little bit more than Davis was. Now, the results of the election are indicated here in this headline. McSparran sweeps county. Popularity of defeated candidate for governor helps roll off big majorities for Democrats. In York County, Robert Spangler was the only Republican elected in any state or federal office. Spangler was elected to represent York City in the state assembly. Malin Haynes' headline is, quote, "Leads his ticket and takes defeat cheerfully. Congratulates winner," end quote. Now, here's a table of the voting results comparing governor and representative of the 22nd District, which is the congressional seat for York and Adams County. John McSparran was a central Pennsylvania dairy farmer and leader in the Pennsylvania Grange. He had strong support in York and Adams counties, getting 60% of the vote for governor. However, Pinchot was elected governor with 57% of the vote statewide. So it was felt that the strong showing for John McSparran was one of the reasons Haynes lost, because he actually got more votes than Pinchot. So that's essentially Haynes, and the newspaper, the York Dispatch, summed up Haynes' campaign. Mr. Haynes made one of the most spectacular campaigns for Congress ever staged in York and Adams County. He was lavishing in his advertising and resorted to many original publicity stunts, end quote. So local newspapers report Malin Haynes moved his family and household goods on January 23, 1923, from the Rockburn Street residence to his newly built home at Haynes Acres. For the fourth time, Haynes used J.A. Dempworth Architects in designing a building. The pictured home, which shows the south side as it's prevalently used for the offices of Eastminster Presbyterian Church at 311 Haynes Road. Additional details and view of the house will appear during the Haynes time there as this presentation continues chronologically. In 1924, Haynes purchases a hunting lodge from the estate of Edwin Locks, who owned the big mill along the Codorus where Route 30 now crosses. Except for the time Haynes reserves it for himself or from scouting activities, he makes it available free of charge for veterans organizations in York, Pleasantville, and Wrightsville. The stone hunting lodge is shown here. There was also a large barn on this 15-acre Helen Township property located on the banks of the Codorus Creek near York Furnace. As with most land purchases at the time, he began immediately after acquiring the original purchase, he immediately starts acquiring surrounding purposes to make that property larger. In 1926, Malin Haynes and Francis Farquhar lead a hike of 1,000 Boy Scouts from downtown York. So you have 1,000 Boy Scouts from the square camping down to this near York, or walking down the York Furnace. When they got there, Haynes furnished them all with a dinner, followed by a scavenger hunt with over 200 prizes. In 1924, Haynes makes another major land purchase in Springettsbury. In the fall of 1924, Mahlon Haynes begins making a string of neighboring land purchases in the township, which quickly blossoms to encompass 318 adjoining acres. The location of that acreage, south of East Market Street and west of Edgewood Road, is annotated on the right side of this 1938 aerial photo. You see, most of that land basically is fields. Now you have trees covering most of it, which is neat. Haynes names this Yorkshire Ranch because the purchase was contingent upon Haynes purchasing all unsold lots in a development known as Yorkshire in the upper right. Thus begins a new venture for Haynes, the Haynes Land Company, for selling building lots. In 1925, for the fifth and final time, Mahlon Haynes uses J. Dempworth Architects to design a building here shown as it presently stands. As built, it was a 5-story, 47-room Haynes Hotel on the northwest corner of North George Street and West Philadelphia Street in New York. The first floor of the Haynes Hotel contained retail stores. Now, the hotel threshold, located at 9 West Philadelphia Street, Haynes' name is still prominently displayed in the threshold tiles. Mahlon Haynes had one of his shoe stores to the right of the hotel entrance. Haynes turned over use of the 5 West Philadelphia Street store to the Bundles for Britain organization, coordinating collection of humanitarian aid for Britain before the United States entered into World War II. Haynes later converted the hotel part of the building into an apartment house, where he names it the Seneca Apartments, S-E-N-I-A-H, Haynes backwards. So that was also the name of his yacht that he purchased in 1931. And his yacht, he basically took it from scouting groups, but also he regularly took newspaper men on that for outings on the Chesapeake, so they give him kind of a better billing in newspapers and free publicity. So he knew what he was doing. Next. Now, the philanthropic work of Mahlon Haynes in York County and beyond could cover many talks. Of the letters of thanks found in his scrapbooks, I selected this letter to include in my talk because it has an interesting link to Haynes Road. Quoting the letter of November 5th, 1940, "Dear Mr. Haynes, I am sending this letter as a silent messenger to express the thanks and appreciation of the President and officers of Bundles for Britain. The use of the 5 West Market Street is a marvelous help. It is men like you who have made the road smooth for our organization to function. Signed, I am very sincerely yours, Neville Mitchell Smith." She is the wife of S. Fall Smith, who was president of the E.S. Morgan Smith Company at the time, maker of water wheels. As an interesting link, in 1928, Neville Smith was the benefactor of procuring a site for a girls' camp, which straddled the Springettsbury and York Township line along Mill Creek. She named that camp in honor of her great-great-great-grandmother, Betty Washington, whose 1-year older brother was President George Washington. So that is the reason, as one travels south on Haynes Road, it becomes Camp Betty Washington Road. That's a neat tie-in. 1925, Yorkshire 2-room schoolhouse. That was another building project of Mahlon Haynes during 1925. It was a school in the Springettsbury Independent School District, which is now part of York Suburban. Suggestions have been made that this is the sixth building designed for Haynes by J.A. Dempler, but however, I've not been able to provide any positive proof of that yet. The schoolhouse opened September 8, 1925, facing Maywood Road at the northwest corner with Fifth Avenue. The building had modern conveniences and featured a finished basement that could be used as a playroom or an occasional community event. The schoolhouse was completely financed by Haynes and was leased at $1 per year to the school board. So just think today, York Suburban needs another schoolhouse. So get somebody from Windham Hills with a lot of money and have them build it and donate it for $1 a year, just like Haynes did. And he basically, they got it for $1 a year until 1947. And then the school board wanted to make additions and they thought it was better if they purchased it. So Haynes basically sold it to them for a nominal price. I think it was like $9,000. So they got it, so then they could design or add to it as they wanted. In November 1925, Haynes held an oyster roast at his Yorkshire ranch for 600 of those that built well for him during the past year. So both the hotel project and this project, there were 600 that included architects, contractors, mechanics, and laborers invited to his ranch for a free oyster roast. Now, 1926 marks the beginning of Haynes' cowboy years. He thought of himself as a cowboy. Now, per his scrapbooks, it appears that 50-year-old Malin Haynes made a New Year's resolution at the start of 1926 that I want to be a cowboy. So Haynes immerses himself in learning about pioneer life on the Great Plains. He learns about Indian lore and of Western cowboys. He not only learned about it, but he was famous for playing the part on his farm and around town. So Haynes begins purchasing the best horses money can buy and begins to race them. He purchases additional oxen and personally uses them for ranch chores. Although it is likely he was doing that as practice for driving ox teams to pull wagons and carts in parades, of which he did quite often, not only in York, but also surrounding communities where he had a shoe store. And essentially, whenever he did that, he always usually won like first or second prize, because it was like, it's unusual to see a guy in an ox cart pulling a wagon, and he usually kind of behaved zanily, put it that way. So, next slide. 1926, Malin Haynes also came up with a unique way of exercising the buffaloes at his Yorkshire ranch. The United States government had a program to basically expand buffalo herds that were dwindling in the West by offering free of charge to ranchers that would try to breed them and expand their populations. Unfortunately, it really didn't work out that great, although Haynes buffaloes turned out to be some of the better. And one of the ways he did that, he came up with the ideas of exercising the buffalo. He had Carl Ort fly over them every Sunday at 3 o'clock. It was a big event. It drew big crowds, which Haynes liked big crowds, to watch them exercising the buffalo. Then they would be back on their feet again. So, and this actually attracted newspaper articles not only around the United States, but I've seen articles Australia, Canada, and England. So Springettsbury made global news with the buffaloes. Another thing that happened in 1926 is that Malin Haynes became chief Yellow Ears of the Hopi Indian tribe. He was adopted into the tribe and named Chief Yellow Ears. Now, under the direction of the United States government, 5 full-blooded Hopi Indians from Arizona toured the United States as part of the sesquicentennial of the United States. Following their appearance before President Coolidge in Washington, D.C., they were booked by Nathan Appel Enterprises to give 3 shows at the Strand Theater in York on July 5th, 6th, and 7th prior to traveling to Philadelphia. Their ceremonies and dances were showcased at the Strand, some of which used live rattlesnakes. Now, one paper said there were tons of rattlesnakes on the stage. Now, I don't think there were tons, but they sounds like something Haynes would say. But there was a need for someone to entertain the Hoppies while in York. Haynes, I'll do it. So Haynes volunteered. Now, Haynes shared his best horses with them to ride trails at Haynes Acres and Yorkshire Ranches, among other things. They hiked at Wizard Ranch, they viewed Haynes buffaloes, and Haynes treated the Hoppies to dinner at the York Valley Inn. A York Dispatch article noted, quote, "The reception given by Mr. Haynes to the party of Arizonians was as unique as it was enjoyable. It is hard to say which experienced the greater enjoyment. The Hoppies probably more, since under an apple tree at Haynes Park, Mr. Haynes was formally adopted into the Hoppy tribe and made a chief. He was actually the 6th person to do that. The first person was actually former President Theodore Roosevelt. So he was the 6th person. And depending on which newspaper you read, he was either the 4th or 6th. So, but that was quite again, that made news in Boston again. It's like anything he did flamboyant made news in Boston, in the Boston Herald. Besides being adopted by the Hoppy Nation, given the honorary title of Chief Yellow Ears in 1926, Malin Ames became Chief Corn Planter of the Iroquois Nation in 1941 and Chief Flying Eagle of the Sioux Nation in 1946. Haynes also began hosting and staging his own rodeos. Here's a close-up of Haynes in his cowboy hat. Again, he could be, at this time, he could be seen walking around York with his cowboy hat, giving people $1 if they never smoked, or if they did smoke, he'd give them $100 to quit on the honor system. So, like I said, he started the great rodeo at Haynes Park. Haynes invited famous Oklahoma cowboy Bronco Billy to stay at Haynes Acres as he performed in York and at Haynes Park in Yorkshire. Billy's real name was Billy McGinney. He was one of Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders. It seems like Haynes had a fascination with Teddy Roosevelt. And it shows up in lots of things in his scrapbooks. So Bronco Billy was, like I said, one of Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders during the Spanish-American War. He's got his nickname afterwards at becoming a champion Bronco buster. On Saturday, November 13th, Bronco Billy and his horse, who did tricks, and they were on the bill at the Alcazar Ballroom in York, which is across the street from the post office on George Street. So you had Bronco Billy performing there all the time, advertising the rodeo out in, Haynes Park. But the rodeo took place November 20th, 25th, which is Thanksgiving, and 27th. And Bronco Billy was part of a large Haynes Park rodeo. All proceeds, which were split equally to fund a building for the Springettsbury Firehouse in Yorkshire and to expand the Yorkshire Zoo. Newspapers reported between 600 and 700 attended each rodeo. The Pleasureville Band performed music between the various events. In 1927, Malin Haynes rides an ox team to drive his Conestoga wagon in a parade in York, celebrating the sesquicentennial of the Continental Congress meeting in York. His appearance was in the first day's parade on October 13th. The Gazette and Daily of October 14th noted, quote, the Mothers Club, quote, whenever Haynes was in these floats, he usually had a sponsoring organization, and any prize money that he won went to that organization. And I think this was like a second place float that year, so the Mothers Club got $200. And it is driven by 4 oxen, driven by Malin Haynes, and representatives of the Mothers Club are on the float. So he's actually riding one of the ox to drive it. Next. 1927, Malin Haynes and some of his friends wanted to stage weekly horse races. However, upon being turned down on using the half-mile track at the fairgrounds, Haynes began planning his own half-mile track in the corner of Yorkshire Ranch. So he said, they won't give it one to let me use it, I'll build my own. And then he did that. The track replaced the Haynes Acres Zoo, which really wasn't attracting much attention. So if Haynes did something that wasn't attracting attention, he quickly got rid of it because he liked attention. Now, the York Riders and Drivers Association were the sponsors, of which Haynes was president. They sponsored the program of racing every Saturday afternoon. It became the first large-scale entertainment venue in Springettsbury Township, regularly attracting crowds of 3,000 and up. In 1930, Haynes Park became the first track in Pennsylvania to hold weekly night races under electric floodlights. Malin Haynes also offered the use of the track and grounds free of charge to organizations for their fundraising events. Now, besides horse racing, Haynes Park was utilized regularly by the Boy Scouts. In the summer months, amateur baseball league games were played there on the infield. There are several statewide championship events. One was a trap shooting event in 1933. It seems Haynes always had some sort of free giveaways and anything held there, and he'd always fully fund them. At the start of the 1937 racing season, on November 31st, a free ox roast, so I guess he had some ox that weren't behaving, so he roasted them, was given to the first 6,000 people attending. So following World War II, Haynes Park became the site of Haynes' creation, the York Horse Show. Horse racing ceased in 1953 when the York Fairgrounds pilfered from Haynes his pride and joy, the York Horse Show. Haynes sold the property and track became the site of a house trailer park for a few years before it was developed later on. Parts of the track actually remained visible into the 1970s in the area of the present intersection of Northern Way and Eastern Boulevard. Now, in 1928, Malin Haynes' mother died. These are the inscriptions on the new headstone Haynes had placed on the old Washington Cemetery in Guernsey County, Ohio, which is where he was born and where the Haynes family was originally from. Haynes' father died in 1875 due to an accident while on a business trip in Philadelphia. It was only 2 months after the son was born. Originally, Malin was named John Morris Haynes. The following year, Elizabeth Haynes changed the name of her only son and subject of this talk to exactly that of her late husband, Malin Nathaniel Haynes, which has caused a lot of problems in some newspapers. Like in some newspapers, they call him Malin 1 and Malin Haynes on the farm, Malin 2, and then when Malin had a son, he named him Malin 2, and it's like, and newspapers occasionally call him Malin 3. It's like, this caused all kinds of problems. But you note on the tombstone, he notes his wife buried in Isle of Pines, Cuba. There are some correspondence in the notebooks that Haynes did not get along with William Pack, so he didn't put on Elizabeth Ann Haynes Pack. He dropped Pack off into the gravestone. Next. Thank you. In July 1931, the initial Springetts Fire Company building was completed as part of the Yorkshire Ranch at what is now 2914 East Market Street. Through Maine's many fundraising events and additional support, he was seen as the primary financial backer and was also an advisor on the construction. The structure served as a firehouse from 1931 until 1958. plus a desk and file cabinet in the building served as the township office from 1950 to 1958. So the sole township office there, at the time the York County Shopping Center was built, the Springettsbury Township offices was one desk in that building. It's kind of quite amazing. A gentleman pointed that out to me after my talk last November. Next. A half-hour layover in Omaha, Nebraska on July 4th during a return trip from a Yellowstone and Grand Canyon rail tour vacation sees Malin Haynes giving an impromptu speech from the rear of the train. The Omaha World Herald reported, quote, newspaper reporters who went to interview Peter Arno at the Union Depot here Saturday night didn't see Arno, but they heard a 4th of July oration. A passenger was shouting from the rear observation platform, our forefathers are looking down from behind us and anxious paternal glances to see if we are protecting this country, this freedom, this liberty that they have shed their blood to bestow upon us, end quote. Before continuing, he paused to whisper to a reporter, I'm Malin Haynes of York, PA. And again, this not only shows, this is a photo from the Omaha papers, and it got across the United States, he got publicity. It's like, this is how he got publicity, is doing zany things. He craved publicity. It's like free publicity for his shoe stores. Now, from 1930 to 1937, the York Airport was located across the road to the west side of Haynes Acres. During that time, the road between what is now East Market Street and Mount Rose Avenue was named Airport Road. In 1937, the airport property was liquidated after the airport closed. That property west of Haynes Acres would soon be the site of the Fairfield development. Upon the airport leaving, the road name is changed from Airport Road to Haynes Road, which still exists. In 1937, Malin Haynes built this house as a wedding gift for his son, Stanley. So he didn't just give him a $100 gift like his mother. So he gave him a whole house. The house is in Yorkshire on the southwest corner of Eastern Boulevard and Pinehurst Road. On April 28, 1937, Mary Elizabeth Nevin married Stanley E. Haynes. Now, at that time, Stanley Haynes served as a road manager for the Haynes Shoe Company's 45 stores. During World War II, PFC Stanley E. Haynes served in Company L in the Army, Company L, 115th Infantry, 28th Division. During one of my Yorkshire history walks, a woman mentioned that her mother often told of the story of the day that Mary Haynes got the telegraph during the war, informing her husband was missing in action. She indicated that Stanley and Mary Haynes were well liked in the whole Yorkshire community and was shocked and saddened by the news. Later, Mary was notified Stanley was captured and was a prisoner of war in a stalag for almost 7 months. He actually lost half his weight while there. Upon returning home, Stanley was never the same and probably had what we know today as post-traumatic stress disorder. Stanley and Mary Haynes never had any children, and after Stanley passed away in 1966, Mary Haynes continued to live at this home at 3026 Eastern Boulevard until her death in 1944. She actually had a beauty parlor in the basement. Did anybody here go to that? On the walks, I usually have 3 or 4 that went to get their hair done there. On June 8, 1939, Sarah Mercer Skull marries Malin Haynes II. He served as sales manager of the Haynes Shoe Company at that time. Malin Haynes' wedding gift to them was a home built just west of his home in Haynes Acres. Now, during World War II, Corporal Haynes served in Company B of the 161st Airborne Engineers Battalion. Malin and Sarah had 3 children, Malin the third, Susan, and Annie. Now, Annie owned the shoe house for a period of time. And this is a photo from the nationally circulated magazine, the Saturday Evening Post. So, and actually, Haynes was featured in close to a dozen national magazines over his lifetime. So he had national exposure. It shows June and Malin Haynes seated, husband and wife. Malin Haynes II and Sarah sitting higher on the chair armrest, and grandson Malin Haynes III on Malin's lap. So this is a 3-generation photo of Malin Haynes. Malin actually, if you name your child Malin, you get 2 free pair of shoes a year for him. So anybody that was named Malin in York County, they probably went for that free shoe deal. So he had all kinds of schemes. Now, Malin Haynes II was serving as president of the Haynes Shoe Company when he died of a sudden heart attack in 1960. Now, these are side-by-side aerial photos looking southward. So at the top, you're looking to the south. Today, if one goes south on Haynes Road, crossing Eastern Boulevard, and also passing the shopping center access to your left, the next left is a private lane. Really, I said private. Don't go back here unless you're welcomed. Whose entry point is indicated by the yellow arrow at the bottom in this 1938 and 1947 aerial photo. From the yellow arrow, it is a winding driveway to reach the Malin Haynes home. Visitors get to view the front of the house on a mound with a large front yard from the location indicated by the green arrow. I have a photo coming up from that location. Continuing along the driveway, the visitor arrives at the back of the house, which is as impressive as the front. Now, since the Eastminster Presbyterian Church acquired Malin Haynes' home in 1957, the church access is directly from Haynes Road instead of the windy drive. And the private lane was nearly straightened to the home built in 1946 for Malin Haynes II. And along that lane, a lot was set up in which Bob Yost built a home in 1960. The view one would see from the yellow arrow location in 1932 follows. So this circa 1932 photo is of the entrance from the main road into the winding drive that went to Malin Haynes' home in Haynes Acres. So this is basically 10 years after he moved there. In the distance is his home. The brick pillars on the entrance to the winding drive were likely placed when the house was built. The ironworks over them, spanning the columns, date to around 1931 or 1932. The Gray Iron Casting Company of Mount Joy, Lancaster County, produced this decorative ironworks. In fact, this photo is from one of their catalogs. It is thought that the light and the Haynes Acres nameplate fabrication have been gone since the 1960s. One gentleman said he after high school, he lived in Haynes Acres and he worked at the Wise, and he walked by there every day, and he thinks that around 1960 that he walked by one day, then they were gone. So some people are questioning, that'd be a neat thing to have now. So the rest of the ironworks are still in place, were still in place until 2017, when a delivery truck knocked down one of the brick pillars, which has since been repaired. However, the ironworks were mangled beyond repair. So this is the photo that I talked to you about, and it is a photo of a gathering of people from the University of Maryland, which Malin Haynes was a proud 1896 graduate. He would regularly invite faculty, alumni, trustees from the college up here for an outing. And the outing usually included some sort of a ride in a Conestoga wagon or a cart at Haynes Ranch. And then he'd take them over to the Yorkshire Ranch and they could see the animals or watch the horses run. Then he'd take them down to the Wizard Ranch. And then he'd take them to the Accomack Inn for usually chicken and waffles, or if he didn't take them for that, he'd take them to the York Valley Inn for a nice dinner. So that was usually their day. And this was actually from a May 1939 Maryland Alumni News magazine. So that was probably I was searching for a photo of the north side of the building when he lived there, and this is the only one I was able to find. Next photo. This is actually the photo, or a photo of the building as it exists right now, as a comparison of the previous photo. Now, the legacy of Maitland Haynes' legacy in Springettsbury kind of has a lot of things going for it. First of all, his home is now part of a church. You have the Haynes Road and Haynes Acres names. So Haynes names are out there like he would want. He had a big impact on scouting in the area. He was the first Springettsbury resident to run for a seat in Congress. He continuously kept Springettsbury in the news with his annex. He built a school and leased it for the school district for $1. He was the primary fundraiser for a firehouse. The Haynes Park track was the first large-scale entertainment venue. And with the final 3 slides coming up, I'll show you something that you probably are not aware of his legacy. Next. Now, during the fall of 1961, Maitland Haynes stood on our farm fence and for 2 years shared stories with Dad. That night, this is the list that I made of things Maitland Haynes reminisced about. Now, at the time, Dad was taking some sort of course. It was something like memory techniques for business. One of the techniques was in conversation with a new client. Later that day, make a short list of no more than 10 words, lines, with a few major highlights, a few things in the conversation of greatest interest to yourself, and a few things the client got animated about or they held their interest the most. So you end up maybe 10 to 20 items, like no more than 10 lines each. Now, one of the assignments was to have a second person do the same thing and compare lists. Now, Dad thought the Maitland Haynes visit was a good chance to try that with me. So that night, he said, this is what I'm doing now, and write down a list. So this is my list now. Before handing it in, though, he had me correct the spelling corrections that I had and redo it. But I actually did this for probably close to 5 things in the next 2 years, which is kind of fun. And the only reason I have this, I didn't keep it. Dad kept it with his papers, and when he passed away, I found them. So I found this one. I found one for one of his business partners, one walk to Wildcat, and actually one with Chief Don Schultz, what was one of the first police chiefs of Springettsbury, when the neighboring building first opened up. My dad's company did the air conditioning in that as mechanical contractor. So we were at the open house, and he did it. So I have about 6 of these. But like I said, I've highlighted 7 of the 16 things on the list from 1961. They all turned out to be associated with a legacy item Maitland Haynes maintains with Springettsbury Township to this day. That is, and those items are, he backed colorful college flag, he backed symbols of Lord Baltimore, his horse racing silk symbols, his changes to township symbol, his roaring lion replaces angry lion, his pen dots replaced railroad tracks. He did not like naming the symbol. So those are the 7 things that I thought tied into an item. Next slide. Now, when Maitland Haynes was going to the University of Virginia, when I saw this, I recalled his conversation about the flag. And I looked up when the flag that Maryland uses was first introduced. Now, Maryland uses a combination of quartering of two different families' coats of arms. He uses the Calvert family, which is actually Lord Baltimore's part, and the Crossland Company. So Maryland's colorful flag was first used by Maryland National Guard in 1889, and it was adopted as a state flag in 1904. Now, Maryland went to the University of Maryland in 1896, which is halfway between those two. So he's talking about possibly the university adopting a flag similar, and when they basically have the same flag as the Maryland does now. Quite a colorful flag. And Haynes horse racing silks, I remember him always talking about, he liked the colors black and yellow. So you see where he got his black and yellows from that state flag. And then he talked about his, like I said, racing silks. He's always using combinations, black, yellow, and sometimes blue. So those are the colors he liked. Now, when he says changes to the township symbol, next one. Now, essentially, the first one on your left, that is an early Springettsbury logo or seal or crest, whatever you want to call it. It's unknown when that was developed. I have a plate with that on, and it basically corresponds to what I remember from Haynes talking about. In about 1940, in another conversation I had with the daughter of one of the supervisors of Springettsbury Township during I guess I had that conversation in 1965, and later on I had other conversations with her, and she said, Harry Whitmer, who was supervisor for 18 years between 1940 and 1950, did not like these symbols. He thought they were too flamboyant to use in any way and form with the township. So that's the reason why Malin Haynes reimagined the symbol. So the symbol in the center is actually what Haynes reimagined. He basically replaced the lion, he used his roaring lion, replaced an angry lion, he said. And it's more in line with what William Penn uses in his bookmarks in the center one, as opposed to whoever drew that first one. And he also, instead of the railroad tracks symbols there, since Springettsbury has two railroads, we have an east-west one and a north-south one on the western border. I guess they thought railroads were important at that time, so we should have it in our township crest or Crownset logo. Basically, he replaced that and he basically resized that. Now, when he said he did not like naming the symbol, I understand, based on what I've seen, it looks like they tried to get the supervisors to accept this in the 1960s, the center one. And the only way they would accept it if they call it the coat of arms of Springett Penn, who is basically the person that Springettsbury Manor was established for by William Penn. So they basically had that underneath, but it wasn't, it's not a coat of arms. And people would basically say over and over again, that's not a coat of arms, it's not a true coat of arms. So actually the supervisors asked me to give like a little history of it at one of their township meetings in, I guess, 2018. And I went through kind of the history of the seal, and they said, we realized that it's not a coat of arms. We were wrong in saying it was. So now in their official letterheads, it says that's the uprated one is on the right, which is clear. And it's basically the same design that Malin did. It says Crest of Springettsbury Incorporated 1891. So I'm happy with that. I think Malin would be happy with that now. So next. So I hope you come back right on time, 80 minutes. So I hope you come back in July. You'll see the second part where I deal with a little bit of land and basically Malin in the township during 1940s and early 50s. If you have any questions, I'll entertain them. If not, hope you enjoyed the talk.